Everyone ran when the lion escaped. Sirens. Screams. Chaos. But one elderly man didn't move. As the massive lioness walked straight toward him, police raised their weapons, and he reached out his hand instead. What she did next forced everyone to stop breathing. And the reason why was hidden in their past. Before this story begins, I need you to do 3 simple things that can literally help save lives. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who believes animals feel, remember, and love just like we do. Every interaction helps these stories reach people who still need to be reminded that compassion matters. Now listen closely. On a quiet weekday afternoon in the United States, a powerful wild animal escaped captivity. Panic erupted. Parents screamed. Police rushed in. People ran for their lives. But while everyone else fled, one elderly man didn't move. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he sat down. What happened next stunned law enforcement, animal experts, and millions who later watched the footage. Because this wasn't a story about danger. It was a story about memory, gratitude, and a bond formed years earlier under impossible circumstances. This is not fiction. This is not coincidence. And this is not something science can easily explain. Stay until the end, because the final twist will change how you see animals forever, and I promise, you will never forget this story. The emergency alert went out at 2:17 p.m., slicing through the calm of an otherwise ordinary afternoon at Redwood Plains Wildlife Park in Northern California. Visitors had been strolling, kids licking melting ice cream, couples taking photos, until the sirens started screaming. I was on duty that day, radio clipped to my vest, when the first shout cut through the noise. Animal breach, large predator unaccounted for. My stomach dropped. Security footage would later show the cause, a brief power failure triggered by maintenance work near the service corridor. For less than 30 seconds, electronic locks disengaged. For most enclosures, that window meant nothing. For Nyala, it meant freedom. She was a full-grown lioness, nearly 400 pounds of muscle and instinct, moving with terrifying calm through an open gate no one noticed in time. Visitors saw her before we did. Screams echoed. People ran. A snack cart flipped. A mother dragged her son behind a restroom wall. Nyala didn't chase anyone. She didn't roar. She walked, slow, deliberate, away from the exits and toward the old service road that led beyond the park's fence, as if she knew exactly where she was going. And somehow, she did. By the time Nyala crossed the outer fence, the zoo was in full lockdown. Gates slammed shut. Police units blocked surrounding streets. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping the sky into panic. I followed on foot, keeping her in sight from a distance no manual ever prepared you for. What struck me immediately was her focus. Nyala ignored the chaos completely. Cars screeched to a halt as she passed. A delivery driver abandoned his truck, keys still in the ignition. Phones were raised everywhere, recording what looked like a nightmare unfolding in real time. But Nyala wasn't hunting. She paused at intersections, lifted her head, and inhaled deeply, as if reading invisible signs written into the air. Then she moved again, steady and unhurried, straight toward a small residential park 3 blocks from the zoo. That's when it hit me. Predators fleeing captivity run toward cover or wilderness. Nyala was running toward people. Specifically, toward one bench beneath an old sycamore tree, where a gray-haired man sat alone, feeding sparrows from a paper bag, completely unaware that a lioness was walking straight toward him. I screamed for him to move. He didn't. He simply looked up and smiled. The man on the bench wore a faded navy jacket and brown loafers polished thin with age. His hands trembled slightly as he scattered crumbs, but not from fear. From habit. From time. Nyala slowed when she reached the grass. Every officer on scene raised their weapon. Tranquilizer rifles locked into place. One wrong movement, and this would end violently. "Sir!" someone shouted. "Don't move!" But the old man finally stood, slowly, carefully, and took one step forward. My heart stopped. Nyala halted 3 feet from him. Her tail flicked once. Her amber eyes locked onto his face, scanning it with a depth of attention that made my skin prickle. Then the impossible happened. The lioness lowered her massive body to the ground and pressed her forehead gently against his leg, releasing a deep, rumbling sound that wasn't a growl. It was a purr. The man knelt with effort, tears already streaming down his weathered cheeks. He placed both hands into her mane and whispered a name no one else recognized. "Luna, you found me." Weapons lowered. Sirens faded. Phones shook in stunned silence. None of us understood what we were witnessing. But this wasn't fear. This was reunion. "Luna," I repeated quietly, stepping closer, careful not to break whatever fragile miracle was unfolding. The man nodded, never taking his eyes off the lioness. His hand rested on her head as naturally as if she were a dog he'd raised from a pup. "That's what I called her," he said, "before the world decided she needed a different life." Nyala, Luna, didn't move. She leaned into him, eyes half closed, breathing slow and steady. Every textbook we had about wild predators told us this shouldn't be happening. I asked the man his name. "Elliot Harper," he replied. "Retired now. But once I was a keeper." He told us to give her a moment. Said she'd waited long enough already. As police secured the perimeter and veterinarians hovered nervously, Elliot began to speak, his voice trembling, not from fear, but from memory. 12 years earlier, deep in the Nevada desert, he had found a starving lion cub near an illegal roadside attraction that had shut down overnight. The cub had been left behind. Broken. Dehydrated. Alone. And Elliot had refused to walk away. Elliot's voice grew quieter as the memory took hold. The cub had been no bigger than a house cat, her ribs visible beneath dusty fur, one back leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The roadside attraction, nothing more than rusted cages and peeling signs, had been abandoned overnight after an anonymous tip brought inspectors too late. Everyone assumed the animals had been relocated. They were wrong. "She was crying," Elliot said. "Not roaring. Crying. Like she knew she'd been forgotten." He wrapped the cub in his jacket and drove 6 hours straight to an emergency wildlife clinic. The diagnosis was brutal: severe malnutrition, a fractured hip, and internal infection. The vets warned him not to get attached. Said even if she survived, she'd never be fit for the wild. Elliot ignored them. For weeks, he slept on the clinic floor. Bottle-fed her every 2 hours. Carried her outside so she could feel sunlight. When the pain hit, she pressed her tiny head against his chest and stilled. He named her Luna because she only slept when the lights were low. "She learned my heartbeat," he whispered, "before she learned to walk." Nyala lifted her head then, eyes never leaving him. She remembered. Luna survived, but the injury never healed cleanly. As she grew, the limp became more pronounced after long movement. Specialists agreed on one thing: releasing her into the wild would be a death sentence. She wouldn't outrun danger. She wouldn't hunt with a pride. And she wouldn't survive alone. Elliot fought the decision for months, but reality won. Using every contact he had, he searched for a facility that didn't treat animals like exhibits. Redwood Plains had the space, the staff, and the funding to care for a lioness long-term. Elliot personally transported Luna across state lines, stopping every few hours to check on her, whispering reassurance through the crate. The day he left her there, she paced the enclosure endlessly. She didn't eat. She didn't lie down. She watched the gate where he'd disappeared. "I told her I'd come back," Elliot said, his voice cracking. But then life happened. 2 weeks later, Elliot was injured during a rescue operation involving illegally kept tigers in Texas. Complications ended his field career. Paperwork piled up. Years passed. And eventually, he stopped believing Luna was still alive. Until she found him. The realization hit everyone at once. Nyala hadn't escaped by instinct. She had recognized him the day before. Elliot explained that he'd visited the zoo quietly, alone, sitting near the enclosure for nearly an hour. He hadn't called out. Hadn't touched the glass. He just watched her breathe, watched the familiar tilt of her head when she listened. When Nyala lifted her gaze and locked onto him, something changed in her posture. She approached the barrier, pressing her injured side closer, as if to shorten the distance. "She smelled me," Elliot said. "Same soap. Same jacket. Same hands." That night, a maintenance fault triggered the brief power loss. To Nyala, it wasn't an alarm. It was a door opening. She didn't run toward freedom. She followed memory. As officers prepared to sedate her, Elliot raised his hand gently and shook his head. "She'll go back," he said. "But only if I walk with her." Every protocol screamed no. But nothing about this situation followed protocol. And somehow everyone knew this was the only way it would end peacefully. The streets went quiet in a way I'd never experienced before. No sirens. No shouting. Just the soft rhythm of footsteps on pavement. Elliot walked first, slow and steady, his shoulders squared but relaxed. Nyala followed at his side, close enough that her flank brushed his leg. Not once did she pull ahead. Not once did she hesitate. Police cars rolled alongside them at a crawl. Officers kept their distance, weapons lowered, eyes wide with disbelief. People watched from behind windows, from rooftops, from half-open doors, afraid to breathe too loudly, as if sound itself might break the spell. When they reached the zoo gates, Nyala stopped. She looked back once, toward the park, the bench, the place where she had found him again. Then she stepped forward. Inside her enclosure, Elliot rested his palm against the barrier. Nyala mirrored him from the other side, placing her massive paw where his hand had been, exactly as she used to when she was small. No sedation was needed. No force was used. The gate closed gently behind her. And for the first time since the alarm sounded, the world exhaled. The footage went viral within hours. Headlines argued whether it was reckless or miraculous, but none of that mattered inside the zoo. What mattered was Nyala. She ate again that night. She slept near the barrier where Elliot had stood. The director made an exception rarely granted. Elliot was given unrestricted access. Every morning, just after opening, he returned to the enclosure. He brought nothing with him, no food, no treats, no props. Just his presence. He spoke softly, telling Nyala about the years between them, the rescues that went wrong, the ones that didn't, and the nights he'd wondered if she was still alive somewhere under the same sky. Nyala changed. She became more alert, more engaged. She stopped favoring her injured side as heavily, moving with renewed confidence. Keepers noticed her stress behaviors fading, less pacing, more rest, more play. Visitors noticed too. They didn't just see a lioness. They saw a relationship. A living reminder that memory doesn't belong to humans alone. But time, as always, had its own plans. And it was already counting down. Elliot's health declined quietly. He never spoke of it, never complained, but we noticed the signs, the slower steps, the longer pauses before sitting, the way he leaned on the railing just a little more each week. Still, he came every morning. Rain or shine. Nyala always knew when he arrived. She would rise before he reached the enclosure, moving to her favorite spot, resting where the glass met the light. Sometimes, she placed her paw there and waited. One morning, Elliot didn't come. Nyala waited anyway. She paced once. Then twice. Then lay down facing the empty space where he always stood. When he didn't appear the next day, a low sound came from her chest, not a roar, not a growl. Something closer to grief. Elliot passed peacefully in his sleep, according to his sister. Heart failure. No pain. In his will, there was one final instruction, a donation to Redwood Plains, designated solely for Nyala's care and enrichment. We added elevated platforms. Softer ground. Shade. Quiet. At the center of her enclosure, we placed a small plaque, for Elliot Harper, who never stopped coming back. Nyala rests there often. And sometimes, She looks toward the gate. If this story moved you, even a little, then it did what it was meant to do. Because Nyala's story isn't just about a lioness or an old man. It's about memory, gratitude, and the quiet truth that animals never forget who saved them when they were at their most helpless. In a world that often tells us animals are driven only by instinct, Nyala proved something deeper. She didn't follow hunger. She didn't chase freedom. She followed love, across time, noise, and fear, until she found the one person who once refused to abandon her. Elliot never asked for recognition. He never expected to be remembered. But his kindness lived on in a way no one could deny. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel. If you believe compassion travel further than cruelty, like this video. And if you believe someone out there still needs to hear this message, share it. Every view helps keep these stories alive. Every share helps save another life. Until next time, never underestimate the impact of a single act of kindness. It may come back to you in ways you never imagined.